Good morning, everybody. No, it's not morning, is it? It's afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody who's joining us now. Getting a little bit webinar crazy at the moment. I don't know what day it is anyway. I don't think any of us know what day it is, do we? Okay, so again, lovely to see some names coming in there on the side. I really actually can't read it. I'm straining then. I don't have my glasses with me. I will learn one day, Deborah, to have my glasses. But I don't know how do you get them over here? Is this how do I do it with this? I've got no idea. Perhaps just don't do it. I think perhaps would be the best bet. Just squint and move forward. Hello, Stephen. Hello, Maxine, Marie. Hello, Kathy. Jan, hi. I think I owe you an email. Belinda, Haim, hi there. Ravindra, hello. Olena. Rianne. Ash, hi, lovely to see you there. All the names are coming in, right. But we're not going to delay any further. For those of you who know, or have attended some of these webinars before, you know we like to start at 2. So we're starting at 2.
Finish on time.
Yes, and we're not having that. We're not having us not finish on time. It's not on. Okay, my name is Jo Keeler and welcome to the webinar today, which we will be taking questions regarding the Belbin Team Role model. Now, at this point, I actually have a confession to make, is I didn't realise, and it was stupid of me, I know this, I didn't realise how many of you would have questions. So when sending an email out asking for people to bring their questions for today, we've been inundated and we only have 45 minutes for the webinar. So apologies that we won't be able to read out every single question verbatim and be able to give it a really personalised response. But Deborah and I have spent some time this morning going through all of the questions and grouping them into certain areas. So we really hope that although you may not get a personalised response to your question, that we will cover it anyway. If, of course, at the end of it, you're still none the wiser and you really wish that I'd thought about this and only asked for a few questions, please do contact us at team@belbin.com and just say, excuse me, please, could I have an answer? And I will be able to do, but I don't mean one of the team, will be able to do that for you. As we've had for the last couple of weeks, we've got Deborah McGovern joining us, and Deborah has been working, as Head of Training and Consultancy for Belbin for many, many years. We've been working together at Belbin for 18 years, and Deborah has a wealth of experience, and it's always good, I find, to have somebody else's voice, somebody else's viewpoint, because we all see things from slightly different angles, don't we? Right.
The other thing we should say is that we're very conscious that amongst the audience, we've got, you know, some of you actually know a lot about Belbin, have used it extensively, and some other people have less knowledge. So we've tried to pitch the answers to cover everyone, but obviously, you know, as you say, you may need or may want a little more in-depth information.
Perfect, thank you, Deborah. Yes, it's very difficult because some people are coming from this from knowing absolutely nothing about Belbin, and some people have also been using Belbin for many, many years. In fact, perhaps they should be joining us with this webinar, who knows. Okay, so let's make a start. The first group of questions we had was all really regarding behaviour. We have questions such as, can my team roles change? If my functional role, if my job changes, should I redo my Belbin? What kind of external influences can change my Belbin, and how often should you repeat your Belbin questionnaire? And one's just come in as well, which I think falls into this. What is the difference between a personality test and a behavioural test? So these are all really the first group of questions that we would like to take some time to answer. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Because I always think it's great to be able to see a picture, isn't it? Deborah, can you tell me, can we see this okay? Yep, can we see my little boat bobbing?
Absolutely. My little boat moving about.
Perfect. Now this is really what Belbin's all about. We at Belbin measure behaviour, we measure what we do, not who we are. And that's your personality, which of course informs your behaviour. It takes on a big part of your behaviour, but it's not the only factor. Belbin really came about after so many years of research, really studying teams and, you know, their reactions when they're playing a simulation to see and find these clusters of behaviour, which were really important. And so that's what we're measuring, what people do, not who they were. Deborah, do you want to add to this?
Well, I would really just say that, I mean, there's a lot of current research actually being done on personality and the amount of change. But overall, personality is much less subject to change than behaviour. And so in terms of the way that we develop and the things that we more consciously can do, that usually comes from our behaviour. Of course, it's as a result of some innate personality aspects that we would behave in a particular way. But the thing that people get to see and that we can change, for instance, with this little picture, it's that the captain might choose for this boat to move a little more, it's anchored, but to move a little more one way or the other. So it may be a conscious decision of behaving differently. Sometimes, like a storm comes up and just blows the boat. So sometimes there are just external influences or things happening that mean that we have to change. But it's usually that it's anchored. Yeah, this is much better.
I knew you preferred this slide. I knew you preferred this one, Deb. That's why I put it on.
Thank you. So really, perhaps if we just look very, very quickly here, as we're saying, personality does, of course, influence behaviour. As to mental abilities, we're not saying whether they should be high, low, or in between, but they will influence. And our values and motivations are really the internalised things. So that can be as a result of our upbringing and religious beliefs, of our internalized experiences. So usually these are the things we don't consciously think about. And then the experiences that we have in life and work can influence those values and motivations. So really they can become internalized. So at any one point, one or more of these things can be much more of an influencer of our behaviour than something else.
So actually, Deborah, I'm going to interrupt now. So where we are at the moment with this pandemic, the external influences are having a far greater impact, aren't they, on the way that we're behaving than perhaps they would do in more normal times.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those things are really vital. And when we talk about those external influences, exactly as Jo said, it can be something that is global and really on such a big scale, but it can also be external to us. You know, I respond differently to one person talking to me than to another. And it's really about understanding that, those external things. And very typically, and this taps into, I think, one of the questions we had, very typically, that can also be the culture of the organisation or the place that you're working can influence. You know, some people want to adapt more to be like that, some not. And all of this is about, a little bit in yellow, the team roles, the role learning. If you've got a way of understanding behaviour, then often you more consciously can think about, well, what should I do? Which part of myself shall I play to most full effect at the moment?
Perfect, thank you, Deborah. So I think if we take the fact that you have Belbin is measuring behaviour, it's what I do, not who I am, and answer the questions, can my team roles change? Yes, they can, because you can see here all of those different influences which will have an effect on the way that you behave. If your functional role changes, should I redo my Belbin? Well, yes, I think wait till you've been in your new role for a little while, don't necessarily do it on your first day, or unless you want to know, how you've reacted to that sudden change. But yes, as we go through, we always recommend that people redo their Belbin as and when there is a change, when they feel that perhaps one of these influences has been slightly greater. So it could be a new role, it could be something else that's happened, a new manager, perhaps your new team, a new culture, Deborah. All of these can really influence your team. So we should keep an eye on that. And it isn't you should do Belbin again every 2 years. There isn't like a tick list. It's when things around you, when you feel there have been those changes. Would you concur with that, Deborah?
Absolutely. I think there is one other thing, and it's not about just a set time, but we have got some clients who do this, they do actually use time, and they say, for instance, every 18 months or so, they like to redo it because they set development actions out of how can I change, or what are the ways that I want to be seen differently. So sometimes, you know, it can be built in as part of a program. They actually have it as developmentally. Have I made those changes? Are other people seeing the changes in myself that I was working towards having? So that's just the other thing to think about.
And I love that, because that's putting it a different perspective. Can my team roles change? Yes. Should they change? Well, maybe they should, because you want them to. You've got that development going on there. And Deborah, you just reminded me, other people have had this before, it's the old cholesterol check, isn't it, with the doctor? You go and get your cholesterol checked, you go away, you do something about it, then you go back to the doctor to see if it's had any effect. And the same can be said about Belbin. You do a Belbin, you look at where areas you want to develop, you want to grow, you want to strengthen, you carry out, you know, different work, etc., to be able to do that, and then you go back. Has it had any impact? Have my team roles changed? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. There we go. Getting such a technical whiz at this, Deborah. I hope you're so impressed.
I am impressed. Of course I am.
Oof, right, okay, the amount of team role strain I have at the moment, for anybody who knows Belbin well, is phenomenal. But okay, we'll work this. I'm trying to be organised. You can't see this. I'm trying to be very implemented with all these questions in front of me. It's not going to work. It's all going to go horribly wrong. Right, so hopefully we've answered those sorts of questions. The next sort of group of questions are very much around the reports. People are very interested to know, how do you handle feeding back a report where somebody's self-perception is very different to how other people see them, because they've added the observer feedback as well? How do you frame that? What happens if you feed back a self-perception inventory and somebody just says, no, that's not me? How do you do that? You know, we do get these. These are all really good questions. Okay, this is another one. How do you stop yourself always talking about just being one role? And I like this one, because we can all fall into that habit, can't we, of well, I am a shaper, I am this, I am that. How do we ensure that we project all of this colourful mix of behaviours that we have? Another question we're having.
Sorry, I'm interrupting on that. I almost wanted to turn that round the other way, because I think quite often we ourselves think, yes, I am a whole mix of roles, but actually it's our colleagues who then think of us, or our manager who thinks of us as being the complete finisher, or whatever it is, actually, just one role.
Hang on.
Wasn't that? I vaguely.
No, this is really good. So before we go on to looking at all of the differences between the self-perception inventories and the flat team roles and the different shapes of reports that you can have, Deborah, I'm reading this directly actually, so this is Belinda, this is your question. And we've highlighted this because we thought it was a really good one. When you have a strong team role, completer finisher, because of your position, how do you help your teammates see you bring other skills to the table as well, especially when this is the least preferred role by many of your teammates? Do you know, I think so many people empathise with this. You have been singled out as the completer finisher, and that is it now. You will get that role for the end of your days. How do you get them to see your other strengths? It's like being an actor, isn't it? It's like being an actor and always being typecast to play the villain or the superhero. How can you get them to see all of these other wonderful roles that you can play as well? Do you know, Deb, I'm going to let you answer that.
I was going to say, there are a few different things there, and I think that actually what it comes down to is communication and more communication. So it's really about explaining that to other people. It's about voicing it. It's about having ideally a team session where you are all able to show your roles, look at the profiles, but then, and I find this when I'm working with teams, this is what I always look at. It's, okay, we can see what the pattern is now and who's come up as top on a few roles, 2 or 3, but what is it that you want to express to your colleagues? What else is it that you think that you have? And perhaps because of the work you're doing, you're not getting the chance to show that. So then when people are observers, they're just seeing more of that, and it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling thing. So I don't think there's anything more important than almost verbally saying that, but also showing it, looking at things like, we have a book, The Belbin Guide to Succeeding at Work, from a number of books, but looking at how can I project the particular team roles, a good example of being particular team roles. And quite often, if you combine but I'm not just a completer finisher, but with showing the things that you are, it's about being able to show some of those things and then having a trade. Do a trading. You can make it a game if you want to. I know we'll talk about this later, but some people were asking about making things more light-hearted. You can do it seriously or in a broader way. But how can we trade? How can we swap? If I'm not being the completer finisher, what are the other things I can be? Is there someone else in the team who can do that a little bit and isn't getting the chance because I'm doing it all, or they think, well, fine, shove it off onto someone else. But it's about looking at what are people's middle roles, what is it they can develop more of, and what would work best for the team.
No, thank you. And I think you're right. I think a lot of the answers to this is communication. And it could be just simply putting your hand up and saying, look, I can't keep playing this role. I can't do it. You know, I'm not getting any personal growth. I don't feel that I'm really making the strong contribution that I can. What are we going to do about it? Who else can play that role for a little bit? So isn't it? It's always about communication.
There's one other way though of doing it, Jo, and it's a bit like the breaking the cups when you do the washing up, but you can just do something really, really badly as a completer finisher on one occasion and people don't come back.
I love that. Yeah, if you do something really badly, nobody asks you to do it again. But that's naughty, Deborah. You wouldn't suggest
that's
that.
not professional.
No,
that's not the way we should be doing it.
No, it's really not. No. I'm just going to share my screen again now, because I thought some of the other questions that we had, it would be a really good idea to look at some pages of the report so we can see what people were thinking about. Obviously I had that all set up beautifully and it's just all got horribly wrong. So let's just click. There we go. We've got there. So people were talking about a flat profile and the shape of profile, Deborah. Now what we have here, we've got Sam T. Sam T happens to have some observers, but you'd still get this page if you didn't have observer assessments. So what does the shape of the graph say? So if everything was very flat across here, everything was roughly at the same percentile, well, I would say that if it was just based on their own self-perception, just based on how they saw themselves, they've hedged their bets. They haven't wanted to be definitive about their answers, and you know there can be lots of different reasons for that. It could be that they don't understand why they've been asked to complete Belbin. There could be a little bit of suspicion around there. Sometimes it hasn't been really clear as to what they're getting out of it. It could be that they don't know their strengths within the team. What we do find is younger people, especially just coming straight into the workplace, do have a flatter profile because they haven't yet worked out where their strengths may lay. So again, it's asking questions about why there may be a flat profile. However, you can also have quite a flat profile, even if you've asked for observers. So this means that you've completed the self-perception inventory and you've asked other people that you work with, who you trust, to feed back on you, and they have to tick lots of words that they think apply to you. And then all of that data is put together via Interplace, which is the software system here that generates this reports, and it's a really quite complicated software system at that. And what it will do is give you a report based on not only how you see yourself, but how others see you as well. So therefore, if you have a very flat graph here, if you're including observers, Deborah, what would you say that means?
That can be, again, lots of different reasons, but sometimes it's because you really aren't projecting one thing strongly. Now, you could say on the good side of that, it can mean that you are very adaptable and flexible. On the negative side, you could say that you're not showing one side of yourself very clearly, and in fact, in the longer term, that makes it difficult to place people. So usually people are not realizing their potential when it's very flat. And if that is someone, because I think one of the questions was what happens if that's the case and it's the leader of the team? Well, I mean, obviously we can't generalize. We need to look at a particular cases, but in the main, that is not usually the most effective manager. It's much better that someone is strong in certain areas in a positive way, but that person who is heading something up has enough self-awareness to see and to know what they don't have, and therefore the team is better than an individual, making sure that they have people around them who can plug the gaps of the things they don't have, so that collectively within that team of people, you have got all the bases covered. So that's one type of thing. The other to comment on is that sometimes someone is in a lot of, or has a number of different job aspects, and so the people who are the observers have seen them very differently. So that what you're getting is not a collective body of evidence. You're not getting behaviours that are very clear to most of the observers. You've got some seeing you like this, some seeing you like that, and that can be the other reason for having something that's flat. So you need always to really look at, analyse and interrogate what that's about.
Thank you, Deb. I think that's really important, isn't it? And it's going back to, why are you doing this? Who should those observers be? Have a real think, who is it, you know, do you want to find out what you're doing, you know, that behaviour within a certain team? Well, if you do, you need to ask the people within that team to be able to act as your observers. It's really important we give this quite a lot of thought to be able to get something that's really useful back. So the other question, actually, and this is one of my favourites because you can really get your teeth into this, is what happens if somebody's self-perception is completely different to their collective observers? So you're seeing yourself as one thing, or not one thing, one particular combination of all those 19 roles, and yet the people that you're working with, the people you've asked to observe you, are saying, no, we're seeing something different actually. How do you frame that to be really positive?
Just to say, by the way, that the slides that Joe's sharing here, this person, in fact, pretty much sees themselves the way other people see them. So there wasn't a big gap. We just wanted to show you where you'd find this information on the page. But you know, I really like having reports to feedback when there's big differences.
I know you do.
Well, a bit of conflict sometimes, but no, seriously, I think it gives you the chance to really work with something, and there's much more room for change and development. So if you are giving feedback, if there's been a big difference, you want to try and find out why that difference has occurred, of course. So is it that the person is absolutely shocked by what they see? Now, if that's the case, if you have amongst the observers a lot of similarities, it might be that that person does lack awareness of what they're doing. And so you're wanting to then go through with them, well, why do you think people might have seen you like this? How come, although you're saying, no, it's wrong, they've not understood me, a lot of people are seeing you in this way. And sometimes breaking that down to the individual behaviours people have seen. You don't know who's said what, but the list of behaviours that comes at the back of the last page of the report.
Let me click.
Okay, get onto that one.
Sorry.
Because what you'll have here,
there we go,
from this list, yes, thank you. So there you can see that amongst those observers, we had 4 observers, and the sort of words that were used. And that's important because sometimes people don't like the idea of being, oh, I'm not a team worker, I'm not a shaper, and they've just got something about that. Whereas when you go through, well, do you think you can see why people have seen you as someone who was diplomatic or reliable or challenging or whatever? Often you then get, well, yes, I suppose because. So you can use the reports in that way. So coming back to the aspect of people and giving the feedback, quite often I find that people are not surprised at all, because what they say is, oh, but for the job I'm doing at the moment, I have to be like that. Mm-hmm. Now there we want to look, and on this page, on the left-hand side, you'll see, we then look and see whether the observers were seeing the positive aspects of that role or the negative. And if they're seeing mostly the positive, you want some negatives or they're not being truthful, but if they're seeing mostly positives, then actually you're playing that role quite well. But if the person you're giving the feedback to is saying, yeah, you know, and I have to be like that, and that's good that they've seen it, just check with them. How are they managing? Because maybe they are expending a lot of energy on trying to be something that really they're not. So that's going to wear them down after a while, and you're not going to be getting the best from the person. And again, the potential long term might be stifled. So it's, again, all of this is about really finding out what it's about and why. And there are all sorts of other reasons and ways of giving feedback depending on differences once you've found out what it's about. But please don't go in assuming that person's going to be upset by the feedback or concerned, because very often I think people know and aren't that surprised by it.
No, thank you, Deborah. I think that's a really good answer. I would just like to say here that if you did want to learn more about these reports in full, we do run accreditation courses, which you might be interested in. Just thought I'd put in that, Deborah. I'd have a little bit of plug for your courses. Of course, anybody can purchase these reports, and that's what somebody else has asked, how do I access Belbin? Anybody can do that directly from our website. You do not have to be trained to use them. However, as I think Deborah has just demonstrated over the last few minutes, there is so much information to get from them, is that I think a little bit of training goes a very, very long way. But you don't have to be, it's not mandatory. We don't insist upon that. Okay, I'm just going through here now. Differences, how do you handle flat, not just one role, how to manage. Oh, there's another one, yes. I think we've already answered it, but I just wanted to show a particular page on the report. Here we go. Somebody says, how do you make sure you're not just always referred to, or you refer yourself as a insert name of team role here? And I always find this page is really useful because it's looking at your top 4 team roles, and it's looking at the combinations, because we're not just one thing. You know, our second role, our third role, all of these influence the way that we behave. We are not always behaving in one particular way. And also, just to get a little bit technical, sometimes there's so many different facets to each of these team roles. You could be quite a strong coordinator, but not have one of those particular aspects of it. So it's, just trying to say it's complicated really, I suppose, but simple in the same way. Anyway, this is a great way of looking at those 4 team roles and looking at the combinations of them and ways and ideas of ways to project yourself. So people aren't just saying, I am a, look, planning, I'm great at applying knowledge. And these are ways in which those combinations really come to the fore. But I'm rambling now, so I'm going to shift all my bits of paper over to the one side. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Right. Back to it now. Right, the next group of questions that we had were all about different models. We had lots and lots of questions about this, different aspects of it. So one of them, this is Patrick, how to build on work already done. So you've already gone into an organisation, they've already used insert other model here. How do you then say, that's great, but we want to use Belbin? So how do we build on work that's already done? Another one is, how can you relate one model to another? So for example, this one was, if you are red in DISC terms, what does that relate to in Belbin terms? And somebody else has asked Brian here, what complements Belbin best? What is the best other model to use alongside Belbin? So we've got those, we had variations of a theme all throughout that, but I think that summed up the 3 main questions we had regarding different models. It's an interesting one, isn't it? And it's interesting because you can't really try and compare apples with pears. You can't, these are very different models, and they are each measuring different things. So we're very much measuring that behaviour, that boat that is on the top of the sea there, whereas other models perhaps are measuring more about the personality, the who am I. So to be able to say one equals another is very difficult. Deborah, what would you say?
Well, I think what's absolutely key is that trying to blend together or work others alongside, I think is actually doing a disservice to all of the models. I think that it can dilute. Having said that, we know, and I mean realistically, the number of times I go in and work with clients where they are already using something else, or they have, you know, we've run MBTI sessions or whatever they're telling you. So using that, great. The really positive thing there is that they're already having people starting to think about the fact that we're different, that different people have different approaches. So that's rather good to build upon. And what I would say is one of the really key differences is with a lot of models, they are saying, okay, what are you and how do you think other people would see you? And what we're doing is actually asking those other people how they see you. So I think one of the key differences is the fact that we use observers, and the fact that the research that went into this from building on work from Henley and the work that then went on from there after 9.5 years of formal research there, went out into the wider world and lots of organisations. There's a lot of really practical things to build upon. But coming back to that for just a minute, I don't think that we can say which other models would you think you can work alongside. I mean, to be honest, Joe, just close your ears for a moment, but sometimes we are working alongside others, and there might even be times when we recommend something else. If we're working in a particular situation where it's conflict or there's particular leadership programs, then we will in fact encourage people to use other things. But I really wouldn't feel comfortable with us sort of endorsing or saying, certainly in this context, it would need to be something very specific.
Because it depends what the team's there to do, doesn't it? It depends what the objective is. Why are you doing it in the first place? Then you're able to be able to see what models perhaps would be complementary. But you can't give a generalisation here, can we? It needs to be quite specific.
It does. But I would say I think a real differentiator is the fact that it is behaviour. We know that, of course, personality does influence that, as Joe was showing the slide earlier. But it is, the focus is what we are doing, and most importantly, how do other people experience us in that way? And I think, in fact, if I can just feed on, because something's come to mind as we say that, it's about the ways that different people will see us. So we'll be seen in different contexts as well. We're not saying, right, we're like that, these people have seen us like that, and that's how we are. No, if I'm then working in a different context, in a different team, then I would choose perhaps, I would be choosing different observers, and they will see me differently. So we're trying to show that there's much more breadth to most of us. We've got many more facets, and it's really about learning more about this so we can make conscious decisions about which parts of ourselves to show more. And I would argue that the majority of other models, I think, are not doing that, certainly not to that extent.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. So it's really much a case of we're measuring behaviour. That behaviour is wonderfully observable. So why not ask other people to observe it? And this can change over a period of time. So the fact that we're not measuring the same things as other things, it's very difficult to say this equals this. It's something you'll spend a lot of time on, and then it isn't particularly helpful at the end point there. Okay, thank you very much. Nothing else has come up about that, so we'll move on now to the next group of questions. Before I do, so technical, I can hear myself back through my headphone. Can you hear me fine, Deborah?
Today is much better sound than yesterday, actually.
That's fine. I'm just going to have to deal with this feedback. That's as long as everybody else is fine.
Actually, Joe, I've just noticed here something that I had a note on, which someone spoke about in relation to MBTI, and it wasn't specifically MBTI, but they were, I can't remember the exact question, but talking about certain percentages of population.
Do you want me to read that out?
Yes, please, because I can't remember exactly what it was.
It's Kristen, thank you for this. With Myers-Briggs, there are certain percentages of personality that are more prevalent in the population than others. Likewise, are there percentages of each team role in the business population, and are some team roles more prevalent than others? So, I knew you'd pick that up because this is one of your favourite questions ever. Right, I'll put that to one side now.
Well, in general, the answer is no across the board. So if we're looking at the statistics, and certainly from the research that we have when we have external statisticians working on this, we've done all sorts of interesting projects looking at things where we expected to find major differences across countries, for example, and in particular let's say, industries, and we find far less difference than was expected. What we have seen, and this has been shown so clearly, is that there can be a really big difference with one organisation and another. Not necessarily in the same field. You might find that there's people in the construction industry and there can be big differences, but it comes down more to the culture of that organisation. So quite often we'll find people saying, oh, but you don't get many plants, do you? Another organisation is saying, well, it's completely so many plants and there's not many implementers.
Yeah.
That makes absolute sense when you think about it. If you look at the culture, why would it be that there's really large percentages of certain behaviours, certain team roles in one place than another? And in fact, that's not usually very helpful. I mean, we have to go with it, it's what's there, but it's our job, I think, to try and help people to see that to have more diversity, it's incredibly important, because where you start to get too much similarity, that sort of monoculture, then usually there's not long-term sustainability. And we can even think about that with some of the big important companies that, I mean, I take IBM, for example. I mean, you know, terrific company. It hasn't got the same dominance. Okay, technology's changed, but do you remember when people used to say, well, that's an IBM person? Well, they probably said man at the time, but an IBM person, because you could almost tell the sort of person who would fit. You knew people who were going to be recruited into an organisation, and therefore when you look, yeah, they've got lots of high percentage of certain types, but that's not helpful long term.
Thank you, Deborah. I love it when it's something that you can really get your teeth into. You sort of light up as you answer. And I think I'm going to just quickly put in here that we do have statisticians working behind the scenes. We are constantly reviewing everything. And what Deborah said was correct. I'm just going to put a plug in here for our amazing distributors worldwide, is that we did get all of the databases. I think we're in over 20 different languages and 30 or 40 different countries now. I'm not good on detail. We've got all of these databases in, and we said to our statisticians, right, let's look at the team role distributions. I'm sure there's going to be some interesting differences there. And they said, no, there's less difference between countries, and there's far more difference within the actual country themselves. So that's always an interesting one. Okay, I now have a page that's just got miscellaneous on the top of it, Deborah. So we're just going to do this first. I don't think I told you about this, so it could be quite interesting. Let's see how it goes. This is a good one. I like this one. I'm going to find the original one. Okay, how do Belbin team roles apply in a team where everybody does the same role, e.g. a call centre or a sales team? Now, I particularly like this one because I had this discussion with somebody only a little while ago. And obviously, the word team has so many different meanings. And in Belbin, we tend to mean team as everybody with a common objective. It's moving towards something. There might be project goals in there, etc., etc. But a team can also obviously be made up of people who are all doing the same work. What's the term you use for that, Deborah? I can't remember the terminology. No, put you on the spot, don't worry, I'll take that back. So everybody, so it could be that you want to have, and you
I see, a collective of individuals.
A collective of individuals, thank you, Deborah, sorry. And of course, that is also a team. So are the 9 team roles, the fact that we need all 9, are they as relevant? Well, actually, I was at a lecture, well, it was quite a while ago now, it was one of our conferences years and years ago, and our German distributors actually presented a paper on this, and they were looking at Belbin team roles in a call centre. And what they found is that although people tended to have the first, perhaps primary and secondary team roles, that those 3rd and 4th team roles were coming in as well. So although you thought on the surface everybody was very similar, actually there were slight differences. And it was really important to know these, because you can say, for example, if somebody has a 2nd or 3rd team role coming in as team worker and they're working in a call centre, and potentially you have somebody who's, I don't know, might be quite, annoying on the phone, perhaps off phone them, who knows. You want somebody who can listen and can be able to converse well with that person, as opposed to somebody who perhaps they're second or third or fourth team role would be shaper. You know, so what we're doing here is looking at those other roles as well as those primary roles and seeing how we can use them. Deborah, would you like to add to anything?
Not a great deal, really. I just think that, you know, you are not going to have automatons.
No, of course
so
not, no.
It is about really helping people to see that difference. And the other thing is that quite often people are more different, really, but they feel that they have to behave in a particular way because that's what's expected of the job. And in fact, even if people are not really a team, you might be having them all doing the same job, but to help them to identify some of those differences, it's a little bit more fulfilling, and as Jo said, you call upon them at times, but also it's going to mean different people will see things in a slightly different way, will question the process, the methodology, otherwise things are never going to change. So I still think it's important to try and tease out some of those differences and how comfortable people are, or whether they're just making themselves be like that to keep the job.
Thank you. I think there's very wise words there, Deborah.
Wise, I like it.
Wise, so wise, so wise. One just come in actually, hi Roddy, is very much asking as well about, do we need all of those 19 roles all the time to be an effective team?
No.
No. They go next. No, it's very much, it depends what the team's there to do. A team is an organic being. It's there and it changes and its needs change depending on where it is with its projects, its demands, the people within it, which can chop and change. So we don't need all 9 team roles all there at the same time. We also don't need 9 people, because obviously we all have 2 or 3 strengths in each of these team roles, and a team, and we discussed this on another webinar, the ideal size is about 4 to 6. Anyway, but Deborah, would you like to?
Well, I just want to say here that where you have got a really effective team, then usually they have got either all the 9 roles within them somewhere, but maybe not being shown all the time. So it might be that someone has got that within what we call manageable. They can call upon those behaviours sometimes. Or it might be that you know that someone who works in another team within the organisation can be brought in at times. So you need access to the roles, but it's about more consciously thinking, which behaviours do we need for the given task at the moment, or the given part of the project, and then working that way, rather than just, you won't necessarily have a really effective team because you can tick all the boxes. It's about how good an example people are.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Deborah. Now, somebody's saying there is something wrong with my sound. I do apologise for that. So what I'm going to do now is, I think we have 2 more sort of sections. One is looking at things like games to be able, and exercises to bring the learning to life, and also remote teams. How do we use Belbin remotely? So what I'd like to do at this point is, for all those who are expecting lots of information about remote teams, is that we actually had a webinar about just that last week. So I'm going to put the recording of the webinar on the email that I send out to everybody with this particular recording. So hopefully at some point we might answer your questions there. And we will be doing more of these webinars again. We have different articles as well that we can point you to. So we're going to give you lots of information basically about remote working, which is so topical at the moment. So we won't spend time on that now. But Deborah, what I'd like you to do, because people can't hear particularly well, and I'd just like everybody to know that I've done this, because I got told off yesterday, because I drew one of these circles on a flip chart, and apparently it didn't look very professional. So if we're here for exercises and ways in which you can bring Belbin to life, Deborah's going to talk you through this, and I'm just going to have a professional chat.
So this is what we call our Belbin Team Role circle, and you can see it's in the 3 categories that I think a lot of people know. You see the social or the people side, thinking, cerebral, action, task. I think it's like one of those
weather coming to my own. Yes.
And a really good thing to do. Now, I know we're showing you like this. I actually used this last week with a team, and I managed to hook up just that. I don't have a flip chart at home, but I managed to work out a way of hooking it up onto my clothes dryer. And then I asked people, I already knew what their team roles were, I had the reports, but it's important for people to share them to share their own information. So I was about to stand up, that's not helpful. I then wrote people's initial onto a little post-it like this, and then we stuck up onto the chart. I'd say, where is your number one role? And then let's say we've got this person as RI, and that was person A. So we just, stick that one on, and perhaps their other role was the monitor evaluator, let's say. That's quite an unusual combination, not one that we see very often, but we might then want to also put their lowest roles, so their two bottom roles might have been, let's say, implementer and implementer last role. So we put that outside. We put it outside when it's a low role. That's person A still. And also the other action role might be completer finisher. So we've got person A. Then we stick person B on. I mean, you get the idea. We'll just put one more in. So put B on wherever you want, Joe. That's it. So their top two and their bottom two. And we can look at the pattern of the whole team together, get them to be talking about it, thinking about coming back to that trade. Well, we've got gaps here, though there's 6 of us, there were actually 5 in the team I was working with last week, but they clearly had some gaps. What are you going to do about that? Well, I have got that as my 3rd or 4th team role. Yes, it might be 3rd or 4th, but is it relatively high? Well, yes, in one case, no in another. Fine, but we start to really use this. And in fact, what I then did, this was a few weeks ago now, but where I had a bigger group of people, I got them to, we drew it up, we're using a whiteboard on Zoom, and they went into breakout rooms and they looked at what those two teams were as a mix, and I'd given them a task to undertake, so they had to work on something together, and then it was actually about how to sell something, market something, and then they came back, and then it was like a competition between the two teams. So these are the kind of things that you'd be doing in person, but it's actually not so difficult, I'm finding, to be working remotely with people in that way.
Thank you, Deborah. I have to say, I use this all of the time. It's my go-to for that first exercise, to find out where you have that distribution, where you have the gaps, you have the overlaps. And I was talking in another webinar how I've seen this being used in every meeting room. So before people sit down and start their meeting, they find out who's in the room using this to see whether or not they need to modify their behaviour, etc. Because, I don't know, they're all resource investigators and won't stop talking. But this is really useful to get it into an organisation, isn't it, Deborah? It's that using it on a regular basis.
And I just want to also make a quick suggestion here. I know someone was asking about conflict. We have a few, actually, I think about 3 questions on conflict, which I know we haven't got time to deal with today, and there will be a separate webinar on conflict. But what I like to do is have something which is set up differently. It's a wheel, but we call it opposite. So it's the roles where it could be complementary, but there might be some problems. And I get people to then use that. Oh, you haven't, have you? Oh, we're not drawing from that at the time. No. But actually, I do the same sort of thing, because if there is an issue between people in the team, do it like this. And remotely is fine. But again, stick things on. But there you can see, that's why, you know, if I like to really look at all the detail, and then that person says, oh, let's just take a big picture approach, no wonder we drive one another crazy and don't communicate very well. And as we know, conflict, usually lack of communication. So, you know, there's different ways of using this.
Perfect, thank you very much, Deborah. Now we've run out of time. I know, and we both hate this because we said we are not going to run it over. I'm just going to answer just one or two that have just popped in because I think they're quite pertinent. How to recognise the real role of a person, not the one he or she shows up with. And the key thing here is add observer assessments, ask people to, I mean, that's the way you validate it, isn't it? Is you're asking other people to get that feedback. And with the Belbin reports, you have to have a minimum of 4 people feeding back before we'll generate that updated report. So you're getting it from at least 4 others. So it's not as if you're just forwarding one other person. You're having a volume of opinion there. Somebody's also asked the evidence of optimal size of teams. This is interesting. Is there, when you're working remotely, how is that affecting the size of teams? Well, I don't know if there's any studies being carried out. We should be looking at that quite a lot, actually, when our R&D department come back, whenever that may be. And what I would say from personal experience that it's even more crucial to have a smaller team when working remotely. I would say because it's easier for people to hide, it's easier for people to not to contribute, it's easier for people to take over. Deb's going, yes, because Joe takes over all the time. It's really easy for that to happen. But if you can keep it smaller online, remotely, I personally think, I've got nothing to back this up with apart from my own personal experience, it is going to be more beneficial.
We did actually, we ran a webinar on just this topic of remote teams, and I think it was, you know, sometimes we know that a team is called a team, but actually there's lots of people, so you can't suddenly say, well, don't include some of the people in the team, but what you can say is have different get-togethers, have different meetings, groupings in smaller numbers, and then only bring everyone together occasionally, because it's much easier really to disengage as well in meetings. Not when there's too many. And yeah, I mean, remote or together, we actually think that 4 or 6 people is a good number still.
Yeah, definitely the best numbers. Okay, so what have we done here? We haven't answered all of your questions, and for that I apologise. Like I said, I was naive to think that people wouldn't just give us all of the questions that they have, but hopefully we've been able to answer some of them quite specifically, others hopefully it was answered within a more general conversation. But if you feel that you'd like a more in-depth conversation, please just email us at team@belbin.com. We will ensure that we send all of the information out on an email. That'll probably be either this evening or tomorrow morning, along with the recordings and a link to where you can get all of the other recordings for the webinars. And we have ones there on the most basic, an introduction to Belbin Team Roles, one going through all of the reports. There is so much there to be had. And we're now taking a week's break from webinars. We've just carried out 8 within the last 4 weeks, and to be perfectly honest, I'm slightly exhausted. And what we're going to do is find out from everybody what they would like to see discussed. It doesn't have to be myself and Deborah. We can have lots of other guests in. We can have lots of other people feeding back how they've used Belbin's perhaps in particular areas. So we're hoping to bring a really great agenda for you, which will start not next week, the week after, and through to the summer. So thank you very much for joining us. Look out for our email. Deborah, thank you as always for your wisdom, and I hope I was able to be slightly more professional this time. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. Right, thank you so much for joining us. Take care.
Bye-bye.